In this section, let's explore upgrading our Debian system from version 5.0x to 5.08. Then we'll proceed to upgrading to version 6.x. So let's unlock the screen as the non-privileged user. We'll launch a shell and confirm the current version using a cat etc Debian version, and it's currently at 5.07. The latest incarnation of version 5 is 5.08 or 5.08. Now, so long as our etc apt sources.list file is intact, we should be able to perform an aptitude safe upgrade with relatively few problems. There are some caveats to look out for, in particular upgrading from previous versions to Lenny, for example, etch to Lenny or otherwise. But for the most part, if you're running Lenny, upgrading is usually a snap using aptitude or apt-get. So we're at 5.07. Now, how do we know there is a new version 5.08? Let's launch a browser and confirm as such, correlating our confirmation from our etc apt sources.list to what we see online. Now we'll do a less etc apt sources.list. This will give us a sense momentarily. And notice the lines that are uncommented that are prefixed with deb, including this security update, sources update if there are any source files installed, and more importantly, the pointer to mirrors.kernel.org, which references Lenny, main, and contrib. This is the key line, as it allows us to perform full upgrades or distribution upgrades from, for example, 5.07 to 5.08. But it doesn't tell us that there's a new version 5.08. Now, there are a number of ways in which you can keep informed, including but not limited to joining the Debian releases newsletter or mailing list, checking in with the Debian website from time to time, checking in online with your Debian sources such as mirrors.kernel.org, and just keeping generally abreast. Now, for the most part, when you install Debian, the references to the security updates will keep you patched to the latest patch level. So long as you run aptitude with upgrade from time to time, that will keep you running the latest patches, or perhaps run aptitude with the upgrade option through cron via script. And that'll keep you with the latest security patches, no differently than from, let's say, with the Windows operating system using Windows Update or some sort of automatic patch management framework. But if you want an entirely new distribution such as 5.08 or even 6.x, then you have to go through the process of running aptitude with the safe upgrade or aptitude with the distribution upgrade option. Now, aptitude, just like apt-get, relies upon the sources that are spelled out in etc apt sources.list. So if you'd like to upgrade to, let's say, version 6.x, you'll have to upgrade the sources reference for deb http mirrors.kernel.org to point to the new version, not Lenny, but the new version of the OS. So, with that said, let's go ahead and confirm the new version. Now, this is the mirror, so if we were to hold control and launch it, this will bring up in the browser momentarily the version of the Debian distribution that's considered current. When you navigate to a mirror, you'll see a directory tree that resembles the following. The key directory to focus on is the dists subdirectory, but you can always confirm by viewing the readme.html file. It points out the current releases, including, for example, 5.08, which is Lenny, 6.01, which is Squeeze. So the Squeeze series is 6.x, which we'll be upgrading to momentarily. The 5 series is Lenny, which is now considered old stable, but still being wildly or used rather widely out there. So with that said, let's navigate a level back up, then into dists, still using the HTTP protocol at this stage. Two different directories represent old stable and stable. Current stable is Squeeze, which is 6.01 currently, maybe 6.02 or otherwise by the time you view this training material, but nonetheless the concepts remain the same across versions. 5.08 is the latest incarnation of version 5, and we're running just one behind it, 5.07. Within 5.08 there are a number of files, but more importantly are the directories where the packages can be referenced, including main and contrib. Now, if you recall, if we take a look at etc apt sources.list, there's a reference to main and contrib. These are the two directories that are spelled out in the directory that we're currently connected to using HTTP. So basically, when apt or apt-get or aptitude connects to the distribution of choice, it connects, in this case using HTTP. It implicitly indicates the dists subdirectory, followed by the name of your distribution, in this case Lenny, which as we follow through the tree reflects, as we've mentioned, dists, and Lenny happens to be the Debian 508, the current incarnation, followed by either the main or contrib directories as needed. The main directory includes its set of packages per platform. In our case, this is binary i386, and it includes the list file which spells out all of the packages that are related to this particular release, and the contrib directory similarly, which are packages which are contributed to the distribution. So with that said, that's how we know 5.08 is available and is later than our current version, and so long as we're pointing to the appropriate source, we can do the appropriate upgrade. So again, we've confirmed our sources by looking at etc apt sources.list. We have the security updates, which is fine. We also have the pointer to what is now old stable, Lenny, which references 5.08, which will allow us to upgrade to that particular version. Now let's launch a gedit window just to document what we've been discussing so far. So far our first task has been to upgrade the distribution from a minor version of 5.07 to another minor version of 5.08, which is all within the Lenny distribution. So this is really a Lenny upgrade. And our tasks include, of course, the fact that we needed to confirm etc apt sources.list. In this file, we're searching to ensure that there is a pointer, so look for pointer to web or local resource or distribution of the desired version, which in our case is 5.0.8, and the sample entry, let's Control-Shift-T here, etc apt sources.list. Notice we don't need to be root in order for this to work. So the sample entry here is deb http mirrors kernel.org, so on and so forth. So this tells us that aptitude will search the particular entry, and I'll put it between single quotes and include that it is pulled verbatim. So aptitude searches this particular entry, and there can be many entries, but in this case one suffices, Lenny, and it'll search both main and contrib trees for packages. So that's in place. Now, how do we perform the upgrade? Simple command, second one now, upgrade the distribution. Now, because we're within the Lenny distribution, we can bypass the safe-upgrade option and simply upgrade altogether using a distribution upgrade. So using aptitude or apt-get with dist upgrade will upgrade the entire distribution. Now sometimes packages will be removed that are not a part of the distribution. So packages that once had dependencies, let's say with 5.07, that no longer fulfill 5.08. Normally across minor versions, it's less of a concern, as the packages tend to remain the same, with changes being security updates and minor package changes. But across major distribution releases, let's say from Etch to Lenny or Lenny to Squeeze, for example, it becomes a concern, or more of a concern. And in that particular upgrade, it's safer to perform a safe upgrade first to get as many of the core packages upgraded to a new version, and then a distribution upgrade, which still may remove some packages that are no longer supported in later versions. One thing you can rest assured with any operating system change is that package dependencies will always change, and as a consequence will result in you having to be careful about the packages that you upgrade. So the safe way is to do a safe upgrade first, then a distribution upgrade when moving across major versions such as 5 to 6. But within a particular version such as version 5, a distribution upgrade is normally the safe route. And let's just mention that. So within a particular version, for example, 5.x, aptitude or apt-get dist upgrade is usually a safe choice on the first try. However, or conversely, across or trans distribution upgrades, distro upgrades, usually require multiple attempts. The first being a safe upgrade, which is initiated using aptitude safe upgrade, followed by a distro upgrade, which is initiated using the same aptitude command or apt-get, followed by dist upgrade. This is normally the step as you trans or cross versions. So within versions, we're normally okay. Now let's save our documentation. We'll reference it once the system's back up. In fact, we should just create a subdirectory here to store our notes, Deb6x. And let's create this directory as docs. And this will be Linux CBT in the wrong field. And that should be here. Deb6x notes.txt, although we're upgrading version 5, of course. So with that said, off to the shell, and we'll need to SU in. We need to be super user, of course. And now we have a root shell. Who am I? Another thing that you should always take a look at just to ensure that it's intact is that sufficient space is available. Df-H on our system shows that the root file system has 21 gigs available, which is more than enough for a distribution upgrade within and across versions. So from 5.07, for example, to 5.08, and subsequently from 5.08 to 6. And this is, by the way, a production box. It's a build box where we build the images that ultimately make it to the production server and shared with you. So this is an important system to us that we're upgrading rather hot. And this particular volume, which is just about 2 terabytes, stores a great deal of the ISO images and various files that are rolled into ISO images, source files, and so on. So it's an important system to us. So we have enough space on the root file system. Also note that the root file system, if you're familiar with LVM, is being referenced as an LVM related object. Sometimes across updates, your system will fail to boot because, let's say, for example, there has been a renaming of the disk convention, such as HD to SD, for example, which is why it's suggested that you reference disks using the UUID of the disk to avoid that problem across your reference points, meaning etcfs tab as well as the grub bootloader. Now, just to add some light to that, if you use the block ID command followed by the path to a particular mount point, in this case root, which is the important file system to be mounted when the system resurfaces, you'll see that its UUID is the following string. So let's just include this in our notes. In the event that you are unable to reboot your system successfully, this is an area to look into. So let's just note as well as a third task, briefly discuss disk UUIDs. UUIDs, as the following, are unique identifiers, globally unique identifiers for particular objects. In this case, the root file system's UUID is the following string. This string can be indicated as follows: UUID equals in 2 places. So let's just note file systems can be referenced using their UUIDs from etcfs tab, which is what the kernel uses to set up the file systems that are required for an operating system, and boot grub menu list. these are the two important files. Let's just take a quick look at these files just to shed a little light before we move on to the actual upgrade. So if we take a look at etcfs tab, you'll see that the root file system is referenced via its logical volume name, dev mapper LinuxCBT win1-root, which was the original name. So it's rather confusing, but nonetheless is a Nix box. Now, within the context of LVM, if LVM, logical volume management, manages your storage, then you normally will be able to boot the system across upgrades, because LVM will usually, pretty much 10 times out of 10, be able to find the various file systems. But there are times when there are issues, and if you were to substitute this location with the full UUID and etcfs tab, for example, then the kernel will uniquely always be able to find the root file system. That's a kernel. However, before we get to the operating system, as we've discussed over many LinuxCBT versions, the system has to be booted. And there is a file, the menu list file, that's read. And it too points to the unique identifier if configured, or otherwise will point to the typical HD00 as the first partition, first interesting partition to boot our operating system. Let's scroll through and find it. So for example, this system boots a 2626-2686 kernel off of HD00. And it uses a root file system of the following: dev mapper, which is LVM. This can be changed to the UUID so that in the event that there is a nomenclature change, the grub or Grand Unified Bootloader will always be able to find where the root file system is located for this particular box or this particular system. So that's just one little thing to consider in the event that you're unable to boot the system, but I haven't seen it fail in LVM. That doesn't mean it can't. So it's less likely to fail when managed by LVM, meaning the grub or kernel's ability to find the root file system. It's more likely to fail in environments where nomenclature surrounding, let's say, IDE to SATA, for example, or some other storage mechanism changes the nomenclature. So UUIDs circumvent or obviate the need for you having to encounter that caveat and play tricks to get around it. So that's just something to keep in mind. And it's mentioned, of course, in release notes and in any aiding documentation that's included. So with that said, let's go ahead and perform our aptitude distribution upgrade for this particular version. And let's get a shell going. And we'll reset this buffer and perform a distribution upgrade. Now, it's also suggested that you run aptitude with the update option, which I've already done, to obtain the latest version of packages available, but that's already been done, so we don't need to redo it. Now, always read the output to get a sense for what's happening. And since this is live, we'll need to read this together. So the following new packages will be installed: libDNS58 and the following libISC50. libDNS55 will be removed. libISC52 will be removed. So these two packages will be removed and replaced appropriately. The following package list from A to Z will be upgraded, which includes our important Apache web server, bind DNS, and a number of other important items. Not so important OpenOffice, which we don't use on this particular build box, but may be for you. The following packages are recommended, but will not be installed. So these particular packages, if they're of interest to us, will become problems. None of the OpenOffice problems or packages are problems for us, but the AVHI and HPLIP may be issues at some other point. With that said, 340 megs will be downloaded, which is not so bad. And let's go ahead to continue with the distribution upgrade. So insofar as our system's concerned, to go from 5.0.7 to 5.0.8 entails roughly 340 megabytes of packages that need to be pulled across the wire. And notice some of the packages will be pulled from the security website, security.debian.org, from main or from contrib. In this case, libc6 dev was pulled from that particular site. The bulk of the packages are pulled so far from mirrors.kernel.org. Notice Perl is being upgraded the base to 5.10, and another package from security.debian.org, libc6, 2.7, Lenny, so on and so forth. So this is upgrading nicely. and being pulled into the appropriate cache, the Debian Package Manager cache. Once intact, the packages will be applied to the system, libSSL. This is an important package. And then once applied successfully, we'll be able to reboot the system, and the Debian version file will be upgraded accordingly. Now, while this runs in the background, let's just note at the next juncture, we will reboot the system and confirm the update. So of course that entails executing the reboot command, and then we will also cat the contents of etc Debian version. This is the file that we examined prior to updating the system, and it should reflect, so output should be, or should include, 5.0.8, and that should be the case. Let's just also note it is important to execute aptitude update prior to executing or initializing the distribution upgrade step. And let's just note that this will ensure that aptitude is working with the latest set of packages available for the given distribution version. And this also applies for security updates as well. So, supposing we were not intending to perform a distribution upgrade, but rather a security upgrade. Notice many of these packages have been pulled from the security side now, even more so than the mirror site. So if we're simply performing a security update, which should be performed often, then an update prior to the upgrade should be performed to ensure that the latest packages are present to aptitude. So if you're running, for example, MySQL Common 505 and any other minor version information, update will pull in the latest version. So supposing we were running 5049 or 5050, let's say 50A or 50B or C or what have you, then the update process will pull down 51A as the latest, which will indicate to aptitude that it supersedes 49 or 50, A, B, or C, or whatever version we happen to be at that particular point in time. So it's a way of version control insofar as the aptitude process is concerned. So far this is moving along nicely. More packages are being pulled in from the security website. Let's just note, in our case, and this may be the case for you as well, so in our case, more packages are being pulled from the security.debian.org mirror than from mirrors.kernel.org. This will not be the case when we perform an upgrade across versions from 5 to 6, 508 to the latest 6 that's available. So this will continue to run, and if we checked a different shell using Control-Shift-T, for example, catting the contents of etc Debian_version, for example, notice it's yet to be upgraded. And Debian provides facilities for determining relationships between files and packages, so you can always confirm which package a particular file belongs to see at which point in the list that particular item is updated. So here are some important components surrounding PHP. Its CLI, for example, version 5's CLI for 5.2, and the plugin for MySQL to ensure that any PHP scripts that we have that use MySQL will be able to talk to MySQL. If mcrypt is used, if curl library is used, libapache, this is the module for Apache's integration with PHP 5, common package shared by all PHP, and a number of other items. Latest version of the kernel, OpenOffice items, these will be invariably the largest files pulled which we're not using. One way, of course, to speed up your version upgrade, of course, is to remove packages that are not of use. On this build box, we seldom to never use OpenOffice. So we could have expedited matters by simply removing OpenOffice, which would obviate the need to download the latest OpenOffice packages, which can easily run up in the couple hundred megs range. For example, this package is just about 37, this one is just about 35, and in total they easily become rather intractable. This is a common package for OpenOffice, this one's rather large as well, and so on. So you get the idea. So this will continue pulling down. Let's take a look to see if the version file has changed yet. And also another thing we should mention is that a version upgrade, in this case a distro version upgrade from 507 to 508, doesn't necessarily mean you'll need to reset the system. So for those production systems, you may get away without having to reboot the system, which means you can perform the update when users are connected to the system, although it is generally not suggested. But let's just note that as well. Distro upgrades in particular within major versions, so that means of course from 5.0.7 to 5.0.8 will often not require a system reboot, which means you can perform this live on a connected system with users operating likewise. So let's see what other packages are coming down. Here's one that's 38.7 megs. And if we stretch this out a bit, we'll be able to see things a little bit better as they're displayed. And this is 12 and a half roughly. This is pulling in the help file. It's not so big as we're already roughly at 70%. So this is moving in nicely, and if your connection rate is faster, it will work as well. Now, that also brings up another question. Could we have simply pulled in the DVD ISO image or the ISO image and just mounted it and made a package repository out of it, similar to what's online? Of course, the answer is yes. So just like this distro tree that we see, we can also replicate this tree for 508. But of course, it would entail downloading the full 2-point-something gigabytes worth of the DVD ISO image and then having to contend with that. So it's a little slow because we're pulling in files. So that's something to keep in mind, because whereas in this case only packages that are of concern are being downloaded from the various mirrors, we would have had to have downloaded the entire 508, which uses more bandwidth for everyone, both sender and receiver and everyone in between, to only take advantage of a subset of the packages. Here we see some security updates for Samba SWAT, Winbind, SMBFS, which allows us to integrate Samba within our file system, SMB client, which allows us to interact with Samba servers, Windows or otherwise, Samba Wireshark, sniffing, OpenSSL, which provides crypto libraries for various applications, PHP peer, extension environment, Python, libxml, all sorts of useful items. Now, so far, all 340 megs have been pulled. It took just under 9.5 minutes. Again, if your connection's faster, it'll be, of course, shorter. And these packages are now being applied. The application should be rather quick. This is a rather snappy system. If we cat proc CPU info, it is running 2.8 gigahertz, and that is good enough. Let's see what the memory looks like. It is 3 gigs of memory, of which the bulk is in use. So the majority of what's happening here is happening in memory. And if you take a look at how much of it is being paged, for example, via swap, as you can see, swap is not being used. So we have about 3 gigs, 2.5 gigs of swap, of which none is being used. So everything's happening in memory, which means as fast as this computer can process. So now, notice the menu.list file was updated, stopping my SQL, and it said it failed to stop it. So perhaps it wasn't running. We could always check to see if that was the case from a separate window. That's psef grep. Always look for errors in the upgrade dump just to be sure. And here we see MySQL was indeed running, so it didn't stop within the time allotted, so it threw an error. And let's just take a look. And this shows that it's bound to port 3306. Let's netstat it ntlp grep. And that's a P option, so let's just netstat ntl, since we're not logged in as root 3306, just to be sure the socket's still there. It's on the loopback adapter. And while that was transpiring, everything seems to have been applied. So this took a while to kill, seemingly by 9, but it restarted it, Perl, so on and so forth. So far, current status 83 updates. Now, let's go ahead and cat that version file, which over here we should have in our history. And now note, we're at 508. And if we re-netstat, we should still see 3306. Let's netstat to see whether or not bind is running, because that's an important process. DNS, indeed. Of course, we could execute queries against it, so dig at localhost, linuxcbt.com, for example, just to be sure that it resolves accordingly. And again, many of these updates were pulled from security.debian, so they're really security patches consisting this new 508 distribution. So with that said, we have actually upgraded to 508. No need to reboot the system. If we cat the contents of menu list, we will see that it points to the latest incarnation of the environment, 26.26.2. If we uname A, for example, the current version, 26.26.2, so 26.26.2, and it still points to dev mapper root file system, which is bound accordingly. And if we take a look back, this is the root of where the kernel information is placed. And here we see the init.rd that was compiled for today. And 26.22 kernel, that's in place. So everything's in place. So this system will be able to reboot sans error. Now our next task will be to upgrade from 5, which is the current old stable, to 6, which is the current stable.